Prophetic Rhythms, a concept explored by Bruce Lyngaas of Trust God Ministries, suggests our lives can move beyond mere routine into a divine flow, aligning with the spiritual pulse that is far deeper than human effort. Chloe, what exactly does Lyngaas mean by this idea of divine alignment?
Elliot, it's a fascinating concept. Lyngaas describes prophetic rhythms as a sacred current or holy breath that encourages intentional spiritual living. It's about connecting to a spiritual, energetic vibration that dictates our pace, rather than just our own human effort or willpower. He sees it as a shift from rigid old methods to a new trusted partnership with heaven, sometimes called a new mantle or assignment.
So it sounds like a departure from mere discipline or ritual. Lyngaas mentions spiritual flow versus routine. Does this mean we discard established practices, or is it more about the spirit behind them? And what does he mean by deep unto deep in the context of prophetic music?
It's not about discarding practices, but transforming them. Lyngaas is saying it's about the internal alignment, the flow that energizes those practices. He calls it a quiet pulse of God's presence, inviting us to slow down, to breathe deeply, to awaken to the mystery. When he talks about deep unto deep and prophetic music, he's referring to inspired, spontaneous melodies that change atmospheres, effectively bringing heaven to earth. It's about a spiritual resonance that goes beyond performance. He also explains that this rhythm is about seeing reality as it truly is, both the seen and the unseen, where the Spirit breathes through every moment.
That's quite an evocative image, but if it's not a doctrine to master or a belief system to defend, and it's about surrendering to a divine flow, how do we practically apply this? It sounds abstract. How do we listen with the whole self, as he puts it, in our daily lives? He mentions that this rhythm is about seeing the image of God in every person, even difficult ones, and calling us to pause and acknowledge Christ within us and around us.
He outlines practical applications, Elliot. It involves daily spiritual habits like prayer and contemplation, but crucially, it's about intentionally setting the pace of daily life in response to the Spirit. It also requires listening and discernment, developing a sensitivity to God's rhythmic sequences, which can show up as changing circumstances or inner convictions. And a significant part of it is releasing old ways, which he compares to Elisha slaying the oxen, ending old seasons to make way for new God-directed assignments. He emphasizes that forgiveness is perhaps the hardest rhythm, but the one that sets us most free.
So letting go of what's comfortable or familiar, even if it feels productive, to make room for something new. Lyngaas also introduces the phrase, live the code. What is this code he refers to, and how does it connect with these prophetic rhythms?
Live the code is more than a motto for him. It's the heartbeat of a life attuned to these rhythms. He sees it as an invitation to return to what was written on our hearts from the beginning. It's not about performing religion, but embodying divine reality. This code is essentially the teachings of Jesus, particularly the Beatitudes. He states, quote, "To live the code is to walk the Beatitudes as if they are breath and bone, woven into the very fabric of our being." End quote. It's allowing our lives to be shaped by God's invisible absolutes, physical, moral, and spiritual.
That implies a radical transformation, not just an adjustment. He cites Matthew 11, where Jesus talks about unforced rhythms of grace, and then draws a parallel to the story of Elisha. Is Lyngaas suggesting that God is actively redefining our norms by removing things that have been hindering us?
Precisely. He directly connects our current moment to Matthew 11, asking if we've built our lives around old rhythms, mentalities, idols, earthly dreams that aren't aligned with heaven. He writes that God is removing heavy yokes, breaking unhealthy ties and expectations, and ending cycles that have kept us running around the mountain but never seeing the fruit.
The oxen story in 1 Kings 19, where Elisha burns his plowing equipment after being called by Elijah, signifies a complete break from an old way of life to embrace a new assignment from God. Lyngaas applies this metaphorically to our own lives, suggesting God is slaying the oxen of obstacles, wounds, and even demonic assignments that have warred against our destiny.
So how do we actually follow the flow and get into this new rhythm? It seems like it requires a deep level of trust and an acute awareness of God's timing, which can often feel elusive, especially when considering that the axis of all creation is the crucifixion and resurrection.
He emphasizes this isn't about mastering a system, but becoming a contemplative person, living with eyes wide open to the sacred. He points to Ecclesiastes 3:1, quote, "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens," end quote, reminding us that our lives are part of God's timing. The early church provides a model with their devotion to teaching, fellowship, and prayer. These practices aren't just ancient rituals. They are vibrant invitations to participate in God's ongoing work. He also points to the Sabbath, not just as physical rest, but as a spiritual practice, a weekly rhythm that connects us to God. He reminds us that living in this rhythm means seeing that everything is connected, nothing is wasted, and the Spirit who raised Christ is breathing within us.
Many people find themselves spiritually stuck or overwhelmed, as Lyngaas describes. If someone wants to start cultivating these rhythms, what are some small, intentional steps they can take without feeling like they need to overhaul their entire life all at once?
Lyngaas suggests starting small. It could be reading a brief scripture passage in the morning or reflecting on a verse during a lunch break. The key is consistency. He says that by dedicating even a few minutes daily to prayer, Bible reading, or quiet reflection, these small habits will grow into foundational practices. He also encourages developing daily spiritual habits, drawing on examples like Daniel, who prayed 3 times a day, and Jesus, who often withdrew to solitary places for prayer. He suggests that establishing a regular habit of silence in prayer can help us become more receptive to God's presence. He roots these practices in rediscovering tools like Celtic Christianity to live deeply.
That makes sense. But what about the challenge of waiting on God's timing, especially when life demands quick action or when things feel stalled? It's easy to say we trust, but harder to live it out when circumstances are pressing.
He acknowledges that waiting can be one of the most challenging aspects. He uses the stories of Joseph and Abraham and Sarah to illustrate that God's timing isn't always our timing. Joseph's journey was fraught with uncertainty, yet he remained faithful. Abraham and Sarah struggled with doubt and impatience. Lyngaas says, quote, "Waiting on God isn't about passively sitting still. It's about actively trusting his timing and being ready to move when he opens the door," end quote. During these times, he advises turning to prayer and scripture to find peace and assurance, knowing God is working behind the scenes. He stresses that waiting is about active trust, not passivity.
So it's not a call to inaction, but a call to intentional, prayerful waiting and discerning. What are some of those practical steps we can take today to foster that active trust and align with God's timing?
He provides several. He suggests cultivating better health through exercise, as it can, quote, enhance spiritual practices by lowering stress and enriching your mental focus. He also stresses practicing patience by focusing on the present, engaging in regular prayer and meditation, and surrounding yourself with a supportive community of believers. And importantly, sharing your journey with others and seeking their prayers and insights. By embracing these steps, we open ourselves to God's blessings and guidance, trusting that He is working all things together for our good. He adds that nurturing the physical body alongside spiritual development is essential, mentioning healthy eating habits as well.
Bruce Lyngaas in Prophetic Rhythms offers a compelling vision for a life attuned to a divine flow, moving beyond rigid routines to embrace a deeper connection with God's timing and purpose. His work reminds us that spiritual growth is a journey of consistent, small efforts rooted in trust and surrender. If you found this conversation insightful, share it with someone who seeks a more aligned and purposeful life.